Hey, potential APUS history students, hope you are doing great. This is Mr. Baker. I wanted to give you just a really quick overview of how to go about preparing for how to prepare. I know that sounds a little redundant for how to kind of have success in this course. So anyway, feel free to reach out to me at bakerd@franklinacademy.org if you all have any specific questions, but I'm going to try to make this about a 15 to 20 minute overview. Just a really quick thing, I'm excited that you all have an interest to explore the history of our great nation in some depth and with some college, direction as the course is set up to be. And so let's go ahead and get started. So the question I always like to ask students is, why would a student want to desire studying APUS history, right? And for a lot of students, it might be, I have a natural interest in this. It's something that, just for the most part, kind of has been something that I've gone to a lot of historical locations and things. And that's altogether great, okay? But what we want to think about is more importantly beyond that, how do you intend to spend your year with really getting into the nitty-gritty, as my mom used to say, with APUS history and any history course. And so just a really quick overview on getting started. The course is divided into 9 time periods. What you'll notice, since you all, I think most of you are coming from AP World or even a World B or something along those lines, is you're going to notice probably a lot of connections in our first unit, which is going to be basically on exploration. And so we start off by looking at pre-Columbian civilizations. A lot of times we think of Native American culture and settlements, and we're like, well, the Native Americans were, diverse, but we don't think about the ways that they were diverse, right? The different locations, how did, all these different things like geography play a role with how they developed reliance on certain resources. And so we spent about a week on that because that's only about a 5% part of our exam. And then what we do is we kind of transition to kind of like an offshoot of that, which is colonization. And then eventually, of course, the revolution, and we move into the modern day as best we can. Okay. And so just really quick here, what we want to really think about is, how does, a student really get effective with how they prepare, with how they study, with how they read. And I will say this, if reading and consistency there is something that you either struggle with or that you need some help with, we can work with you on that, okay? But we also want to make it clear that reading, not just secondary works, but also the idea of primary sources, we'll get to that more in a second. That is really what I call the thing that really differentiates APUSH from the other levels, honors and standard. We still do documents in those other 2 classes, but we do it more frequently. And of course, the emphasis on skills is a bit more what I call substantive. Okay. And so just a really quick thing, keys to success, and then we'll walk through a few other things, is when you're getting into reading, we're going to be using basically one primary text this year that's going to be kind of like the driving force of a lot of what we do, especially when we look at writing. And it's a newer text, so you'll get a hard copy of this, and you'll also get an actual online access, which I'll share with you a little bit later. But it's a really good text because what it does is the authors, I think, have done a really good job breaking down things along the lines of the content, how it relates to themes and patterns. And it also has, I think, a lot of really good emphasis on things like things along the lines of primary sources. The thing that we find with this text that I think makes it a really effective text is the fact that the first 3 units, right, which are 1, 2, and 3, so basically 1491 to about 1800, are very much concentrated on how to help students really develop those historical thinking skills, with how they analyze documents and also how they write, right? So you'll notice that as we transition from sequence, units 1 through 3 to 4 through 6 and 7 through 9, you'll notice that you have a lot of practice and hopefully a lot of expertise. And as a student, you're going to start to ask yourself, okay, what things have I maybe not mastered, because I think, guys, even people that have written on history for a living would probably agree, if they're humble enough, that the idea of mastery is certainly something that is hard to do, right? You know, we're not going to be Master Yodas, pardon the pun with the Star Wars there, you know, living 900 plus years or whatever it was. So it takes time and also a lot of attention to detail to get good at this craft. Okay, so you're not in it alone. We do a lot of focus here, just to let you know. Okay, and so we want to be open to the idea of growth, you know, and I don't think that's just an AP skill, but I think that's a skill for students in general. And then also just a big picture thing, time management. I think most students that have taken AP in the past would probably agree that, you know, you're not going to be able to probably be successful if you only look at this as a very small portion of your week, 10 minutes a day. You know, you're going to probably have to do some work on the weekends. Okay, I like to call this a 5-day approach. So, you know, if I was all of you, I would definitely, after school is out Friday, you know, go out and do something fun. You know, go, if the movies are open or whatever, go out with some friends, go biking, whatever. But either Saturday or Sunday, depending on your interest, you should probably be moving into the reading for that next week, and definitely organizing, you know, taking some notes and things like that. We'll get into that a little bit later. Okay. And so anyway, what would I do? First of all, I do not give an extensive summer project. Okay. My expertise, I guess I can say that, with teaching this class for 16 years, I don't think that a lengthy summer project is something that is going to ultimately yield better results in May. Okay, so what we do, however, accomplish is that I get you started on the first unit. Okay, and the reason for that is because, you know, we only spend about a week to 7 or 8 days on unit 1. And so I want you all to be able to read it. Now you're going to be using the AMSCO text, and you'll get a copy of this to use as well. We'll talk about how to use them somewhat interchangeably. But this is going to be the text that you use. Now I've sent out a PDF of this. It is not the 2015 edition like you see here. It's a 2016. It's basically the same book. So it's not something that, if I were you all, I would worry too much about. But anyway, but you'll be using that to prepare. And then the first week, we're going to be intertwining the fabric text. All right, so we'll talk about how to do that, activities in class, that kind of thing. Okay, so anyway, definitely something to keep in mind. I will be posting, if you want to use this book as well, there's some really good study guides, reading guides, whatever you want to use from them, that one of the, not authors, but one of the teachers that uses it has put together. And it's a really, really good resource if you like to use it. You don't have to, but I do post those. And we'll be using a lot of things from the fabric as well. Okay. But what I would do is, when you start to prepare, I'm going to say probably, you know, what you want to do by day 1 is going to take you probably a couple of hours. Couple of things that this will do. Number 1, it's going to show you the time commitment that it's going to take to be successful in this course. Okay. There is a lot of personal responsibility with reading, as I just said. And then the other thing it's going to do is it's going to kind of get you in, I guess, kind of like a pattern of what you want to be able to do. Okay. So what I would do, there's a couple of things that I'm going to bring to your attention that's very, very important. Okay. So let me change my share screen here so I can actually show you a couple of things. So for those of you that have taken another AP course like AP World, I think most of you probably, if you've had an AP History, you've taken that. You probably remember talking about things like causation, continuity and change, periodization, comparison, context, historical argumentation, the list goes on and on. Okay. And so what I think you should do before you start to really break down a secondary reading is, first of all, you want to understand what to look for as you're reading, because part of reading is what is factually there. The other part of the reading, guys, is how do I think about it in terms of themes, in terms of concepts, right? In terms of skills even, okay? You know, we'll get to how the primary sources play into that, okay? And so this is not something that you have to really, quote unquote, memorize every little nitty gritty thing. But I definitely think if I'm all of you, I'm going to print this out. I'm going to have it in my notebook, wherever you do your readings and your notes and things. Okay. And I'm going to be in a position to where I can really, just understand, maybe, you don't have a good, when I say good, as in, verbatim definition of context. But if you know that basically the nuts and bolts of context is you're trying to describe the historical situation, right? That's kind of, around a time period or a theme or whatever, it's going to get you kind of like in the what I call the habit. All right. Because I think being successful is working not necessarily hard, but also smart, right? So when you're reading, you're like, okay, I know I need to understand, how geography plays into this or whatever. Okay. So I would definitely think about those things. Now, the other thing is, and you'll notice, guys, as we go through all different of these 9 units, some units are very heavy on things like foreign policy and economic development and things like that. Whereas other units are maybe a bit more focused on things like, political development. Later on with American history, a lot of you are aware of political parties. That doesn't, I would say that doesn't happen overnight. When Washington becomes president in the late 1780s, early 1790s, there's a case to be made that they're kind of inevitable. There's a case to be made they couldn't be too. That's why historians like to argue. But anyway, but you'll notice that, again, I don't think you necessarily have to memorize verbatim every one of these themes, but just understand that these themes have certain things that relate to the history that we're going to be looking at. All right. So I won't read all of them to you, but again, migration and settlement, right? It's like, all right, what does it mean to migrate? Well, we're moving, right? We're basically having people either coming into the country or dispersing within it to different parts. Okay. And that's, if you think about it, guys, that's a theme that I think almost every time period, whether you're looking at early colonization or even like the modern day, right? Some of you might have families that have moved from northeastern states or western states or whatever because of different reasons. Okay. And so what I would encourage you to do is, again, to have that handy. Okay. That way you can be like, well, I know that I'm supposed to really think about how to break these down as I read a chapter. Okay. Because the one thing, guys, to keep in mind is, when we write, when we defend, when we make arguments, we have to be able to substantiate it with good historical evidence, right? And part of that, we'll get to that with the documents here in a second, is documents. We'll get to why that's kind of like I like to call it the historians, just like we say that the legs feed the wolves, to an extent, you could say that the primary source basically feeds the thought of historians, right? Or at least it should. But we also have to understand, why was it written? Who wrote it? What are some people that was written for? And then also the context. Okay. Again, some of you are like, well, man, Mr. Baker, you just basically covered what Ms. Hobgood or whoever you had last year maybe talked about. All right. But again, we're constantly building upon progress, right? The idea of academic growth. Okay. So even if you had a lot of this last year, which is great, you want to be able to look at it as you're taking your understanding to another level, because that's what we basically need to do. Okay. So what do I want you to do after you've read the secondary text? Okay. Then a good skill to think about, and this is going to take time, guys. And for a lot of people, this can get, to where they're like, man, there's a lot of stuff that we have to do. Again, something to keep in mind. We're all in this together. Okay. We're a community. You have a teacher that wants you to succeed. I take it that you want yourself to succeed. The challenge is there, but also the support to make you successful is also there. Okay. So just keep that in mind, because, for some people, this is something that takes a little bit more effort and time to get good at. Right. But if you're committed to it, you're going to be, I think, overly successful. And also you'll learn a lot. Okay. So what's going to be the thing that we want you to do for your first document assignment. And this kind of gets me guys familiar with where you are as far as your document abilities and things like that. Okay. Well, the answer is what we want you to be able to do, okay, is we want you to basically analyze 3 primary sources. Okay. And so when you're analyzing a primary source, okay, first of all, I would not do this assignment before you do the secondary reading, because the secondary reading is going to give you a lot of, my mom used to say, the expression food for thought. Okay. So you want to be thinking, how can I bring an understanding of what I've read, and eventually what we'll discuss in class, the themes, the concepts, etc., to basically understanding the document. Okay. Now, some people call this the HIP method, and that's fine. I prefer just to, call it IPHA or whatever, but it's not wrong one way or the other. But at the end of the day, okay, there's certain skills that you can use with every document that you'll read or look at or whatever it might be. And there's certain ones of these that are not going to be as used, okay, with all of the sources. Like, for example, every source is going to have some kind of context, or as the College Board likes to call it, but I think it's basically the same thing, historical situation. Okay. So, and you can see, I think there's definitions of those in the handout, guys. But, you want to be thinking, okay, where does this document connect to my understanding of the time period, the broader, reasoning for why it's there. Okay. Now, keep in mind, inanimate objects, okay, things like, rocks or, teapots or whatever it might be, those are not going to have points of view. Okay. A teapot cannot have a point of view. All right. But if you're looking at an excerpt or maybe even a political cartoon or something along those lines, then, those have potential, of course, to reflect a person's point of view or whatever. Okay. So you want to really keep that in mind. Okay. I like to tell students, you always want to be thinking about historical situation with a primary source. And then you want to be thinking about, okay, what is the audience? If that applies, like, for example, if Mr. Baker was making a speech right now, which I am to an extent, basically the purpose of that is to inform you about how to be successful APUSH students. The intended audience are students that plan to take the class, but it could also be for your parents. It could also be for administration, right? It could also be, let's say I posted this to YouTube, right? And we know that YouTube is a huge bit of information that millions, probably even billions of people can access, obviously. So you got to think about that, right? In very broad terms, beyond just saying, well, Baker was speaking to me, right? And why, okay? And so that's the kind of mentality that you want to use with basically breaking down these 3 documents. Now, these are excerpts, okay? So they're about a page and a half each, give or take. Okay, one of them is a visual, the other ones are actual excerpts, okay? And so what you want to do is you want to, again, break down what content in that document is absolutely essential to understand what I call the surface level of that document, okay? And then you want to be thinking about those thinking skills that we just talked about, okay? Is there an intended audience? Most likely, yes, okay? I would say for this first assignment, all of you should be focusing on a minimum of 2 of these. Always, what I say a moment ago, historical situation or context, and at least one of the other ones, okay? And then outside information. Now, this is something that I know that a lot of you guys were exposed to this last year. I tend to expect more from what the College Board rubric says. The reasoning is not to make your lives miserable, I promise. But let's say that you're supposed to use a minimum of 2 pieces of outside evidence and you use 2. One of them is wrong. One of them, let's say, and we all know that we make mistakes. It's human nature at times. And let's say, you only use 2 and one is wrong, then you you've obviously kind of compromised points there or whatever. If you use 4, and guess what, all of them are correct, then you know what? Great. If 2 of the 4 are correct, now you don't want to purposely misuse information, right? That's not good academics. But we also know it's really easy to make a mistake. Okay. And so that's why you'll notice it says a minimum of 5 pieces of outside information, well explained, and also making connections to specifics with the documents. Okay. So well explained, the difference there, guys, is that we're not just fact dropping. Explained is something that kind of you could describe like, you know, conquistadores, but explanation would be, you know, that they had desires to, you know, to expand into the new world because of a religious reason, right? Or a political reason or an economic reason or whatever. Okay. So you're building upon that evidence to help you make more sophisticated arguments. Okay. And then you'll have at least 3 connection questions, or what some people call essential questions. You'll find this out, guys. I like to do a lot of conversation. I'm kind of one of those teachers. Hopefully a lot of you have had teachers in the past. If not, then it might be a little bit of a transition for you, but I think you can handle it. But I like to do a lot of discussion, a lot of ideas, a lot of defending points of view. When I say defending, that doesn't mean that you're picked on or anything. Okay. But really challenging you all to understand, you know, the history that we're learning, the history that we're studying, and more importantly, the history that we're trying to connect to the modern day. Okay. Now, none of you, I think it's safe to say, have people that were alive back in the 1490s and you know, probably even the earlier 1900s. But as we move forward, you know, you're going to be able to have conversations with people in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you know, of course, the early 21st century. And that's kind of cool, right? So think about, you know, what kind of questions, you know, as a young up and coming historian, would you want to ask people that lived in these times, or even as you're reading these primary sources or looking at pictures, you know, what would you want to know, or what should you know? Okay. So I'll end there. So for day 1, okay, a couple of things that you want to have done. All right, just to reiterate, you want to have chapter 1 read. All right, now you can use, if you go back to the email that I sent out I guess it was last week, you'll notice that there was a reading guide. Do you have to use that reading guide? No. All right, but for those of you that like to have things more organized so that you know what to maybe really pay attention to, that reading guide might be helpful. Okay, so that's the first thing that I would have done. I would not start that until you've gone through the guidelines for success, those 2 documents. Okay, how to basically understand what is context asking you, etc. What are the themes? And then I would also have the document study. Now, what you'll probably notice is that as we move forward, the document study, sorry about that, guys, the document study is actually going to be something that you're going to build upon your skills as we go throughout the year. And that's okay. Okay. So you'll get a lot of feedback, especially early on, about, you know, well, you know, this might be something to think about in addition to what you said. Okay. But it's something to keep in mind. Okay. And that is it. No summer project, but you want to get pretty much time period 1 under your belt so that that first week we can introduce our course in more detail, and bang, we're moving into content. Feel free to email me, baker@franklinacademy.org, if you have any questions or things that you need me to clarify. Otherwise, you should have all the details in that email that I sent out. If you're kind of having a problem finding that, let me know. I'll resend it to you. And hope you all are doing great. Stay safe. And like I said, if you need anything, please feel free to reach out. Okay. Have a good one, and thank you for your time.